Yeah, Dan, I liked you. You said more of a disaster, admitting that the current government is a
don't even
in that generational cost of living crisis. What's happening to the NHS? Partygate, because the Prime Minister has been fined at first lawbreaker. But look, Dorsey Dowden overlooked the fact that Labour are standing more candidates in these local elections than the Conservatives. Labour 5,324, the Conservatives 5,273. So there isn't a pact with the Liberal Democrats. I personally think there probably should be to unite the progressive vote, but also Dorsey Dowden should acknowledge that from 2010 to 2015, his party was in a coalition government with the Lib Dems. Then from 2017 to 2019, it had a deal with the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland to stay in power. Then at the 2019 election, it had a deal with Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party, which didn't stand candidates against the Conservatives. So it's all like chaos now. You know it is. Parties get exhausted in power. You look at what's happening with the MP in Tiverton, Honiton, who was looking at porn, but he said he really fancied tractors. You look up in Wakefield, the Tory MP there was having to stand down because he was found guilty of molesting a teenager. Sleaze is back in a John Major level. Labour and other parties aren't blemish-free, but it's particularly infecting the Tories. You look at what's happening to the economy, you look what's happening to public services, and before you go on about if you have a pact and you get to an election, you have a coalition, there'll be broken promises. Look what Boris Johnson is doing with his manifesto from 29. He's shredded it with a national insurance increase, tax rises, including corporation tax, cutting international development when he would stick it. You could go on and on and on. Now, if Britain wants change, it's probably going to have to be the anti-Tory parties, and there's a majority of Brits who are anti-Tory, somehow working together. Perhaps not formally.
I don't think Brits want that. I don't think Brits actually can stomach the idea of a Starmer, Rayner, Davies, Sturgeon, hodgepodge. I mean, Angela, that is a nightmare.
It's an absolute nightmare on so many levels. I mean, it's classic Kevin that he makes the point by pulling the Tories apart rather than making the point of what the Labour and Lib Dems would do for Britain. Remember, this progressive vote, if it exists, is not some kind of bunch of lard that you smear here and there where you feel like putting it. You know, we're people. We go into the ballot box and we think about what's going to be good for us. I say lard. I mean, I'm also a long-haired, ginger-headed, northerner called Angela with a big gob. So, I should really be aligning myself with Angela Rayner, but I don't. But that's for a whole different conversation. My beef, two levels. First of all, setting aside that we don't need the instability of huge change at the moment. Keir Starmer, it's a cliche, couldn't run a bath, never mind run a party. And my beef with him goes back to between 2015 and 19. This was a man who campaigned robustly to put Jeremy Corbyn at number 10. Now, I don't just say that because of the anti-Semitism. I'm Jewish. That was a very personal, deep hurt on so many levels. We don't need to cover Corbyn now. If that's where his judgment is kind of focused, then that's somebody who really doesn't understand what the British
Kevin,
people want.
He wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister, and he also actively campaigned and led the charge to overturn the biggest democratic vote in British history in Brexit. Kevin, I don't think the British public are just going to forget that in a hurry. I really don't.
Dan, just point out that John Major got more votes than were voted to take Britain out of the European Union. So when you say it's the biggest democratic vote, I think you've twisted it, and turnouts have been a lot bigger in previous elections too. However, you're quite right. He did want to be back in the European Union, didn't want Brexit, but he's reconciled himself now to the fact Britain is out, and his slogan is "Make Brexit work." There's no way he would take Britain back in. It'll be very interesting to see what the Liberal Democrats promise in their manifesto, because that could be a point of contention between the two. And on Jeremy Corbyn, you're quite right. He wanted him to be prime minister because he thought he would be better than Boris Johnson. And given Boris Johnson's record, you can make a credible case.
Kevin, can you say that, given you look at Corbyn's position now, for example, on international relations, and you look at how well Boris has handled this war in Ukraine? Angela, I mean, it's just crazy to suggest that Corbyn would be a better Prime Minister.
Kevin, Kevin, I know you get very excited, but how would we defend ourselves if Corbyn was, I mean that in the nicest possible way, if Corbyn was in power? And, you know, we've had Putin saber-rattling with nuclear weapons. Obviously, we don't want to see it escalate, and that we're hopefully, please God, that's just rhetoric. But, you know, with Corbyn or the likes of the Lib Dems and Labour in number 10, we'd have what we're going to fight them with, you know, water pistols. And the other thing that I think we're forgetting is, how are they going to get on? Only 3 or 4 days ago, the Labour Party and the Lib Dems had an almighty spat about the so-called placing of online adverts on the internet, Facebook, because they suggested that the Lib Dems wanted to decriminalise drugs, and it was this huge almighty row that broke out. Labour Party came out and said, "What are the Lib Dems saying this for? They should be looking at their record on crime and their policies on crime." They're not even getting on when they're not even in power together. So how on earth can you going to completely confuse British electorate in such uncertain times with all the things we know about, stomach some kind of, you know, pact?
Kevin, how do you respond to that?
Even suggest the two parties would get on.
As Angela noticed, the disputes and the spats and the occasional civil war within the governing Conservative Party.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the Tories.
The Chancellor was plotting to replace Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and all of a sudden
we're talking about Labour and the Lib Dems and how on earth they would form a coalition government. That's what we're talking about.
What, Labour and the Lib Dems?
You only defend by attacking.
It will depend, actually, Dan, on the maths. Now, if you look at Labour to form a majority would require a bigger swing in the vote than Tony Blair got in 1997. I suggest that will not be
going to happen.
Exactly. I accept that will not be happening. And there's that big block of Scottish votes, the SNP. Labour are going to take generations to get back, if they ever get back. So Labour's task, Keir Starmer's task, is one, to deprive the Conservatives of a majority, then two, attempt to become the biggest party, then three, see if you could form a coalition or you rule as a minority party. But this idea, that would be somehow really, really unstable. And we have stability now as for the birds. It's just not the case. There is no stability now. I remember David Cameron in 2015 tweeted, "Britain faces a simple and inescapable choice: stability and strong government with me, or chaos with Ed Miliband." Well, all we got was chaos with David Cameron, who thought he wouldn't get a majority, would have to rely on the Lib Dems. He didn't want his European referendum. He had to have it. He lost it, and he went. And since then, the country's been in utter turmoil. So
Angela,
you can say a coalition will be lots of pushing and shoving, and there would be some instability. There's no question of that. But there's huge instability now in a governing party with a supposed 80-seat majority.
Angela, final word.
Here's a very fundamental question. What does Keir Starmer stand for? Because I'm baffled.
No one knows.
I mean, when it comes to all the big calls, we know all the things he doesn't want to do. Oh, stay at home. Oh, maybe we should have another lockdown. You know, it's a bit like a kind of not the 9 o'clock news sketch for our older viewers. Whereas at least on the big calls, at times of an unprecedented, you know, we had a pandemic. I was just talking about it today when I was saying to somebody, did we really go through that? When you see people milling around and thronging in shops and out and about, he made the big calls and he got them right. The vaccine, pioneering the vaccine program, not going into the Christmas lockdown, all the things.
Exactly. He got a lot wrong. He got a lot wrong, and no one is trying to say that Boris Johnson was perfect throughout the pandemic. But the idea that a horrific coalition of Starmer, Rayner, Davey and Sturgeon would be better from Britain, well, I think that idea is for the birds. But fascinating. Thank you for having it.
Starmer summed up what he stands for in prosperity, security and respect, which it really means economic prosperity and social justice.
Thank you, Kevin,
Jeremy
for clearing
Corbyn.
it up. Shame that he can't. The associate editor for the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, too. So who do you agree with on this? Well, Matthew on Twitter says the UK would be a global laughingstock with a lab-lib coalition. From Adam, it's hard to be worse than Boris and his fake Tories, raising taxes on the working poor, green initiatives and billions on wasteful government spending we don't need. Sounds like Labour. And from Marcus, it would be a disaster. It would be the end of Britain. And your verdict is now in. 83% of you agree with me that a Labour-Lib Dem pact would be a disaster for the country, while 17% of you say it could be OK.